The average human life expectancy has been increasing steadily over the past few decades and even before due to the advancements in science, technology and medicine. However, unfortunately, so too has the rate of anxiety across the world, but particularly Western culture. So in this video, we're going to be looking at anxiety, what might be causing it, what might be causing the increased rates over the past few decades, and how we can alleviate or reduce it in our own lives. So just a quick disclaimer, I'm not actually a doctor myself, so if you feel like you have any experiences with anxiety, then it's probably best to either speak to a therapist or a doctor, and they can then guide you on the right path towards recovery. In this video, we're going to talk about the more general and less medically orientated forms of anxiety, so you can understand the triggers and how you can then go about avoiding them to reduce your chances of experiencing anxiety. So I find it's very helpful to understand how your brain works, and essentially your brain is a problem-solving organ or problem-solving computer. One of the side effects of this is your brain is continuously looking for problems to solve. So even if you end up solving the majority of your problems, your brain will then start scanning the environment for new things to solve so that you can better your circumstances and reduce future potential risk. This is why the kind of problems in your life are directly related to your environment. So if you end up in a very positive environment, the kind of problems that you find yourself with are the ones that you've intentionally taken on. Whereas if you end up in a very negative environment, the kind of problems that you have to deal with are ones that are forced upon you, and it's very difficult to deal with them because a lot of it is external. This is why if you end up in a social circle that's very negative or very hostile, you end up taking on those problems yourself, and then you have to deal with a lot of conflict in your life and a lot of hostility towards one another or yourself. A very common example of this is if you spend a lot of time on social media engaging in political arguments or disputes, you end up being immersed in that kind of environment and you make those political issues your issues. And these political issues are very hard to solve or deal with, and the solution is outside of your control. So you end up finding yourself in a very problem-focused world rather than a solution-focused one. Ultimately, you are mainly a product of your environment. So if you're able to steer away from negative triggers, you find yourself in a more positive state of mind more often than not. Now, the flip side to this is if you end up gravitating too much towards the side of comfort, this is also a problem because when you don't use something, you tend to lose it, and things in life tend to atrophy if you don't stimulate them. So if you end up spending too much time in a place of comfort, the things that traditionally gave you a lot of strength tends to wear away. And this could either be physical strength or particular mental strengths as well. So two examples of this are physical fitness and reading. And both of these essentially are like muscles, where if you don't use them over time, it requires a lot of effort just to do a simple task. So in the case of exercise, if you end up doing lots of weights, your muscles end up strengthening. But if you do no weights or you don't do any exercise, those muscles start to wear away and atrophy over time. But the same thing is with reading. If at the start you are not used to reading, it takes a lot of mental energy and it ends up tiring you out just to read a few pages. Whereas if you train and train, or in this case read more often, then reading becomes a lot more lightweight because your brain will start to automate these processes and strengthen your kind of metaphorical reading muscles. One of the main reasons that the rates of anxiety have increased is because we now live in a world that is so overstimulating. In the olden days, our problems were limited to our immediate tribe or immediate environment, and therefore the scope and magnitude of these problems were capped based on how many people were in the tribe and how spread out it was. But these days, the lines are blurred as to who is part of our tribe and who isn't, and there are so many different things vying for your attention. It's a very honourable motive to try and solve all of the world's problems, but in order to do so, you need to take them on as your own. But unfortunately, our brains and bodies are just not equipped to take on such a large number of issues. Therefore, it's extremely important to choose your battles wisely. There are so many things trying to grab your attention, and they normally do so by either using something called negativity bias or being very inflammatory. So when you see these things scattered around your environment, your immediate impulse is I need to engage in this or this is important. But in fact, these are just tactics used by media companies and individual people to try and grab your attention. Essentially, the media is just a series of channels trying to make other people's problems your problems. So being aware of this is very important so that you can selectively avoid things that you don't want to take on, and you can focus on the problems that you actually want to solve in your life. So the two main strategies that you can use to reduce or lower the effects of anxiety in your life are avoidance or build immunity. Avoidance is where you cut out the things in your life that are not important and you focus on what is truly essential. But in order to do this, you need to know what is essential and the things that are not essential, how they're trying to manipulate you into taking on those issues. In terms of building immunity, you can either do this in one of two ways, and the first is unconscious conditioning, where you end up just over time becoming more and more used to the world's issues and have a smaller effect on you, but they still do have an effect on you. It's just more subtle and it builds up over a longer period of time. And unfortunately, this is a bad strategy because it desensitizes you from a lot of the good things as well as the bad. The much better way to build immunity is through education, insight, and wisdom. Over time, you become more aware of the negative impact from the negative sources in your life, and you're able to separate them and push them aside and focus on what's truly important to you. So just to summarize, be aware of the rabbit holes. There are so many things that are innocuous or might seem like they don't have much of an effect on you, but over time you end up getting into arguments or disputes, or you are triggered by certain things in your environment. So instead, you either have to avoid them or train yourself to look for the manipulative effects of these things. So that's all for this video. I hope you found it useful or informative, and I will see you in the next one.